everyone, this is Heather. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be making 4 quick and easy Halloween cards. On a recent trip to Michael's, I picked up this really cool Halloween set. It's by Recollections, which is Michael's own company, and I really loved the kind of sketchy design of these. I thought they'd make some really fun cards. One thing that I noticed about these is that most of the images are solid and are going to look really good stamped out in black. So that doesn't really leave a lot of room for coloring or adding a lot of color to the card. So when I'm using stamps like this that are pretty solid, I like to do really fun backgrounds. That stamp set didn't have any sentiments in it, and I really wanted to add some to the cards. So I'm also using this Witching Hour stamp set from Inkadinkado that I've also picked up at Michael's for the sentiments. One thing that I wanted to point out about this stamp set is it is silicone. It is not made of photopolymer. There are some pros and cons to that. One nice thing is that these are less expensive than photopolymer. Another thing though is that they don't really stamp quite as well as a quality photopolymer. There's nothing wrong with these, but it does take a little bit of extra work to get a nice crisp image, especially on stamps like this that are solid. One thing I really recommend is conditioning for these types of stamps. You really should condition all of your clear stamps, but especially with ones that are made of silicone. If you kind of rub an eraser or even a really light sandpaper over top of these, it will give them a little bit more grip and they'll stamp out a little bit better. I don't recommend using sandpaper on your photopolymer stamps though. And my favorite tip when working with silicone stamps is to use a stamp positioning tool. This way you can stamp the image multiple times and get a really nice crisp image. So let's get started on the cards. The first card that we're going to make is the pumpkin with the bats. I've got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of orange cardstock that I've cut in half and folded twice. I'm using one on this card and one on another. I have a black piece of cardstock cut to 5 1/4 by 4. And I have a piece of white Bristol Smooth cardstock, and that is cut to 5 by 3 3/4. And I'm also using this fun polka dot stencil from Ranger. I've gone ahead and placed my stamp where I would like it to be and put my paper in the stamp positioner. I'm using black Memento ink to ink up my image. And as you can see, it did not pick up a lot of ink, which is why the stamp positioner is perfect for working with these silicone stamps. So I'm just going to continue to ink it up and stamp it again until I've got a nice black crisp image, and that might take 3 or 4 times. And now I've placed my sentiment on my positioner. I'm going to stamp that in the upper left-hand corner and stamp it a few times until I get a good image. And one last tip, because I am working on Bristol Smooth and I've applied so much ink to this, it's going to take a little while for it to dry. So I do like to take my heat gun on low and heat set that ink. For my background, I want to mask off my stamped area. So I have an oval that I've die cut from masking paper. It's about 3 inches tall. It's not going to completely cover the entire image, but that's okay. I'm going to place that over my pumpkin. And I'm going to place my stencil over top. I'm going to turn it over and tape my stencil in place with some washi tape. I've got everything on a scrap piece of paper. And I'm going to ink blend my background. I'm starting off with Distress Oxide Fossilized Amber. So I've got ink on my brush. And I'm just going to lightly swirl that ink on the cardstock over top of the stencil, and I'm going to go about halfway down. And then on the lower half, I'm using the Harmony Spectrum Noir Water Reactive Inks in Pine Green. I'm going to do the same, just light swirling motions on the bottom of the cardstock and pull that green color up towards the yellow. And I just want to bring that green up into that yellow so they kind of blend in together. So unfortunately my stencil shifted a little, so I have a little bit of a mess over here, but I'm just going to go ahead and carry on. And I'm going to remove that masking paper. And you can see we have that nice clean area around our stamped image. And before I do any coloring, again, I'm going to go ahead and heat set this ink. To color my pumpkin, I'm using Tri-Blend markers from Spectrum Noir. This is their new brush markers. So they have a different tip than the original bullet point tip. I've got a review video of these on my channel if you'd like to check them out. I'm using the burnt orange in the lightest shade on the marker to fill in all my pumpkin. Then I'm going to go in with the darkest shade and kind of in a flicking motion, add that darkest color where I would like it to be shadowed. Then going in with the medium tone of the burnt orange, I'm going to overcolor in between those dark and light shades. And then I'm going to go back to the lightest shade and blend all that in together. I really love these Tri-Blend markers for very easy blending. And here's this finished panel. Really quick and simple coloring in a fun, colorful background. I'm going to tape this onto my black mat and then adhere that to my orange cardstock base. And here's our first card finished. I think this next card has a really cool kind of spooky Edgar Allan Poe look to it with the crow and the skull. I've got a sheet of black cardstock that I've cut in half, scored both of those. I'm going to use that for the base of this card and one of the others. I have a really fun piece of pattern paper that has text on it. This is from a Muse Studio and it happens to be text from Sleepy Hollow. So I thought that would be really fun for this card. It's cut to 5 1/4 by 4. And then I have another piece of that same paper for my stamping. I wanted the creams to match in the background. So I'm going to flip it over and stamp on the back side so that I know these two creams are perfect together. The first thing that I want to do is add that torn look so it appears that this page has been torn from a book. So down the right hand side of the paper, I've turned it upside down, I'm going to grab the paper, kind of pinch it in between my thumbs and forefingers, and then carefully pull the left hand side towards me. I want this to be controlled. You don't want to just rip it really quickly. You want to hold on and kind of pull it in and pull it out just so that you get a pretty straight tear. And that gives you that cool deckled edge. To add even more of a old book page look, I've got some brushed corduroy, Distress Oxide, and a Tim Holtz blending tool back on my scratch piece of paper. And I'm going to add that all along the edge of my paper. And then I also added just a few spots here and there on the paper. Now that I'm done with my ink blending, I've placed that pattern paper into my stamp positioner. I've placed the candelabra where I would like it to be. And just like before, I'm going to use black memento ink and stamp this off directly onto the pattern paper until I get a good crisp image. And with that stamped, I'm going to swap out my paper and stamp out the crow and the skull. I wanted to add just a little bit of color to these images, so I'm taking the darkest tone of light yellow blend. I'm doing the flames on the candle, the crow's eye, and just a little bit around the cracks of the skull. And I realized that I'd forgotten to stamp the sentiment, so I've placed that back in and stamped out the cast a spell words. And with my scissors, I want to cut out the crow and the skull, and I'm going to cut away some of those little sketch marks, but I will leave some of those behind. So now I'm going to place my pattern paper onto my cardstock, kind of lining it up on the left-hand side and the top and bottom. I've placed foam tape behind the images that I've cut out. I'm going to place those on the card. And I have some really pretty black and gold twine. I'm going to open up my card and I'm going to wrap that twine around a couple of times. Cut off the end. Then I'm going to tie these two ends together and kind of slip it in place, sort of slide it under the bird's tail. And then I'm going to cut off the excess. And here's our second finished card. Moving on to our third card, I'm going to be doing the cat with the pumpkin. I wanted it to look like he was sitting on a wooden floor with a stone wall background. For the card base, I have that other piece of orange cardstock. Using my stamp positioning tool, I've gone ahead and stamped out the stamp a couple of times. And then I have some really cool cardstock from Memento that already has a little bit of like a wood grain texture to it. The gray piece has been cut to 5 1/4 by 4. I'm using 2 embossing folders from Tim Holtz. The gray goes in the stone or brick background. I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. I've also got this strip of brown that's 1 1/4 inches and it's the same width as the gray. I'm going to place that in the embossing folder and also run that through my die cutting machine. So the paper that I embossed with is white core. So it's color on both sides with white in the center. That means you can take sandpaper and rub that over top and the texture of that embossing folder will really show. I'm using my Tim Holtz sanding block, but you could use any type of sandpaper. Out of another smaller piece of that same brown cardstock, I've stamped the witching hour with my black Memento ink, and I've die cut that with a small stitched square die. And I'm just going to run the edges along the sanding block to also reveal some of that white core and give it a little bit of extra texture. So I've stamped my black cat onto 110-pound weight white cardstock. Again, I'm using a tri-blend marker from Spectrum Noir. This time I'm using the orange blend in the bullet tip. I'm going to completely color in the pumpkin with the lightest shade. And just like I did on the other pumpkin, I'm going to add some shading and shadowing with the dark and overcolor with the medium. And then I'll blend it all in with the lightest shade. And just like I did previously, I'm going to take my scissors and cut out my image. With my image cut out, I'm ready to go ahead and assemble my card. I'm going to place the stone background on the card base. Then I'm going to apply the wood grain at the very bottom, just lining that up. On the back of the cat and the pumpkin, I've got foam tape. Then I'm going to put my little sentiment in the upper right-hand corner. And that finishes off our third card. And now we're ready to move on to our fourth and final card, which is the witch hat card. It says good witch or bad witch. I've got the other piece of that black cardstock for the card base. On 110-pound cardstock, I've stamped the hat, again using my stamp positioner and black Memento ink. And the larger piece is Bristol Smooth because I'm going to be doing some ink blending, and I've stamped the words good witch, bad witch. I've heat set my ink and I've brought my scrap piece of paper over, and I'm going to be doing some ink blending with some more of the Spectrum Noir water reactive inks. I've got Damson Wine, Crushed Velvet, and Plum Jam in a large blending brush. I'm going to be starting off with the Plum Jam. And again, in soft swirling motions, I'm going to bring that ink about 1/3 of the way down from the top of the cardstock. Moving on to the medium shade, I'm going to put that down the center of my card, kind of overlapping with that pink at the top. And next, with the darkest shade of ink, I'm going to ink blend the bottom part of the panel. I'm using a Post-it note just so that I don't get fingerprints on there. And when I'm happy with my ink blending, I'm going to use my tool to heat set it and be really careful not to touch it and get any fingerprints on it. With that dry, I'm going to take a permanent pen and I'm going to put a question mark at the back of each phrase, and then I'm going to write or at the bottom. And I've got this really fun star embossing folder that I picked up at Joann's. This is from their brand. And I'm going to place it inside the folder and run that through my die cutting machine. And once I have that cool star pattern embossed on there, I'm going to take a damp paper towel and just kind of lightly swipe diagonally across the card. It just helps add some movement and color because these inks react with water. They'll sort of smear and add a really fun pattern. And again, I'm going to heat set this. With the light and dark shades of blue hydrangea tri-blend marker, I'm going to color in the stars and the band on the witch's hat. Then using the darkest shade of ice gray blend, I'm going to fill in some of those open sections on the hat as well as the buckle. Then I'm going to take my scissors and cut out the hat. I'm going to take my star background, place that on my black cardstock base. I've applied foam tape to the witch's hat. I'm going to place that at a little bit of an angle in the center. And here's our finished 4th card. And here are all 4 of our quick and easy Halloween cards finished. I think that each of these cards would be really quick to sit down and make a whole bunch to send out for Halloween. The fun backgrounds really help add a lot of depth and dimension to some simple solid image stamps. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my channel and subscribe, and I hope you have a spooky day. Bye!